When dinner was over, Elizabeth returned directly to Jane, and Miss Bingley began abusing her as soon as she was out of the room. Her manners were pronounced to be very bad indeed, a mixture of pride and impertinence, and she had no conversation, no style, no taste, no beauty. Mrs. Hurst thought the same, and she added, "She has nothing, in short, to recommend her but being an excellent walker. I shall never forget her appearance this morning. She really looked almost wild." "She did indeed, Louisa. I could hardly keep my countenance. Very nonsensical to come at all. Why must she be scampering about the country because her sister has a cold? Her hair so untidy, so blousy. Yes, and her petticoat. I hope you saw her petticoat. 6 inches deep in mud, I'm absolutely certain. And the gown which had been let down to hide it, not doing its office." Oh, poor Elizabeth Bennet had a hard time with Miss Bingley and Mrs. Hurst, didn't she? But that phrase, her petticoat, I hope you saw her petticoat, reminds me that I have a project to do. Because indeed, if I am going to make my Regency dress look a bit less of Keira Knightley's slight faux pas in being almost see-through on her dress in this one, and be a little bit more like Jennifer Eel in the 95 version, where you can see her petticoat is standing up to its duty, which is to sit under the main dress. The petticoat has a few different useful functions. Of course, it adds an extra layer of protection, warmth. So it adds protection when you're jumping stiles and puddles. You can lift the hem of your dress without exposing your ankles. And also, it can provide a bit of an uplift. Now, some of the especially evening fashions in the early 1800s Regency period could be quite sheer, the cotton that they're made out of. And so having a proper petticoat underneath to help stop it being too see-through is really useful. And in fact, I have discovered that often you could have coloured petticoats, precisely so you can see that colour come through in the sheer dress. While this picture that I'll show again of Jennifer Eels in her white dress, you can see that the material is quite transparent, but she has that lovely white petticoat underneath. Now, in researching petticoats of the Regency period, I found you've got 2 basic choices. One is the Bodiced Petticoat, like I've shown here, or in this picture of an extant copy. Or you can go with an unbodiced one, which rather than have a waistline that sits at the waist, it usually sits high, which means you normally need to have some sort of strap to hold that petticoat skirt in place. I'm actually thinking I'm going to try to do a bodiced petticoat to put under mine. And it will be important, not just because it will provide a bit of extra texture, but it will also give a bit more fullness to the skirt. And again, as you see in the Keira Knightley picture, that skirt could really use a bit more fullness, let alone having that kind of transparency see-through thing going on. So I need to make one of these. First things first, I thought about what pattern am I going to use. And in searching Regency petticoats online, I came across a great site called Sense and Sensibility. Now, they do patterns, and I kind of wish I had discovered this site back before I got started on this project, because I had already sort of worked out the pattern that I was going to be using for the dress. But this site also came in useful, because I don't know how well you can see it here, but they have a page that explains how to take the dress pattern and adapt it to make a bodiced petticoat. Things to look out for, things to think about, how to adapt it to make it. So I'm thinking, even though I haven't used their dress pattern, maybe I can take the pattern of the dress that I'm using and follow their fairly easy to follow instructions to make a petticoat that will work with the dress I'm planning to make as well. I will link, as always, this down below if you're interested in giving this a go as well. The beauty about doing a bodiced petticoat like this is that the bodice also helps to give that silhouette, the profile that you need, the uplift that the girls need. And I'm hoping that in doing this, if my stays don't quite hold up the distance, this will also help to lift the girls. So that's how I'm going to do the pattern. What material am I going to use? Well, again, cotton will be ideal. It's probably what they would have used, and that's good because I've got a few different types of cotton. The question will be if I've got enough, because it will need pretty much almost as much as a full dress. I have not enough of the white cotton, so not making a white petticoat. I have some of this cream, which I probably could get away with, but I think I've only just got over 2 meters of this one, and I don't think it will be enough. But as I said, colours are not a problem. And I have about 3 meters of this blue cotton lawn, which I think with the width of it should be enough, I hope, with some careful cutting out to make up my petticoat. So there we go. That is my plan, to have this lovely blue petticoat to sit under my Elliot costume. And hopefully once I've got this done, I will actually be able to start working on the things that people will see. But let's not get ahead of myself. Let's get to work on this rather delightful petticoat so that I can jump styles with the best of them and walk to my heart's content like Miss Elizabeth Bennet does. So come join me as I work on my next Anne Elliot project. Okay, so I've got this old white calico that I will use for my draft, and the idea is you take the bodice front and you angle it at the centre front here, which means that you'll open up to be able to gather in the edge at the bust line there. So let's draw that in. I'll also be narrowing this, but I'll draw it in for now and then mark my new line inside later on. So here's the front bodice piece for the petticoat with the 3 darts. I left that line in there. That's the original centre front line. It is quite interesting because you find you add like 2 or 3 centimetres to the actual bust measure, and I'm wondering whether it's almost a bit full there. But, you know, it seems to work. It seems to hold the girls up quite well, so I'm going to stick with it the way it is. I recut out the 2 back pieces as well so that it would have the extra length at the bottom and the lesser at the top there. So I think I'm all good to go, along with the skirt pieces, to see if I can get it out of my preferred fabric. So here's how it looks on my dress form with the 3 darts. I'm not sure that it's going to gape as much there when it's finally put together. At the moment it's sitting a little low because, well, boobs on the dress form don't move, so normally it would be hiked up a little higher to about there. But it seems to be fitting otherwise quite snugly, which is what you want for the support. So I'll see how it goes. I may even end up cutting this armhole down just a bit. it did look better on when I tried it on myself, but I did not get video of that, so I think I'm prepared to cut out the pattern from this and give it a go in actuality. What I'm thinking, I'll use this as the third layer of the bodice, so I'll have the blue either side and this in the middle, and that hopefully will give it enough structure as well to provide support. So let's see how that goes. There weren't too many options for my layout. I just folded it in half, realised I could just get 2 skirt pieces in next to each other and hopefully the bodice pieces. It's going to be a little bit tight to cut out 2 layers of each of the bodice pieces, but with luck it will all work out. Fingers crossed. And yes, indeed, I am cutting on a bed, believe it or not. This is the best place I had to lay this one out, and so I'm just being really, really careful not to cut the fabric of the sheet at the same time that I cut the skirt. That bit I just cut, that's going to be the waistband of the petticoat. I'm hoping this side strip, even though it's not on the straight grain, will be enough to do the lining of the waistband. That's how tight this layout is getting for me. So fitting 2 of the centre back bodice pieces seem to work okay in that. See the rest of that fabric? I need to get 2 folded halves of the bodice plus the side back. So here we go with the metre wide fabric. I have actually managed to get all of that out. So my skirt pieces, that will be the waistband. I have 4 of the back pieces, so lining as well as proper. I've got 4 of the side back. For the front, I've got 1 full front piece. For the lining of it, I've had to do a bit of careful piecing with the straps, so I'll attach those straps first thing, but nobody will notice that extra seam because it'll be on the inside. So I think what I'm going to do now is get that piece together, then get my white mock-up that became the pattern piece, pull it apart and attach it to the lining, so it'll almost be like a flat lining, and I'll be able to then treat the lining as one piece, the outside as another. So let's get going. As always, Laurie is ever so helpful when I'm sewing at home. There must be a reason why I actually enjoy sewing on the train, and it's because I get a bit more work done. Certainly it goes a lot quicker, but she's adorable. I wouldn't have it any other way.
If this is your station, prepare to disembark.
So back to the train. Here's how I'm going with the flat lining and sewing in the darts. As you can see, I've tacked it all down before I sew in the actual darts itself, and that seems to work well. Right, so here I am again, and the bodice of the petticoat is coming together quite nicely. I'm just starting to sew the lining there to the front of it. But what I want to do now is think about what boning I am going to put into this. Because I'm thinking of lacing up the back opening, I thought I should put some boning in the back to help support that lacing. I also thought that under the arm might be a useful place. Now, in the instructions from Sense and Sensibility, they suggest to bone each of these darts. Now, I don't think I want to do that because I am probably going to be wearing stays with this anyway, and I am really worried about it pinching and sticking into me down the bottom here if I bone these. So at this stage I'm planning to leave those alone. I'm not planning to bone the centre front, but I think at the very least a bit of support here to stop it bunching up, and at the back. Now I have a few boning options here. One which I've never really liked is this sort of, I don't know, Rigoline type. It's got about 4 plastic tubes all sewn together. So I've pretty much discarded that as one of my options. Whoop, there it goes. I have this, I think it is actually a synthetic boning that is really nice and firm. This looks like good stuff, but the other stuff that I have are that size and that size of zip ties. And these are primarily what I used for my other corset, and they did a really, really good job. They're not quite as firm as this, but structurally they do a pretty good job. So what I'm thinking is probably for the back of it, I'll get the firmer one to hold that in place. And for under the arms, where I probably only need a bit of light support to stop it bunching, I'm just going to use this thin zip tie. I will then decide whether I need 2 channels of boning on either side of the back or not. And I'll probably decide that sort of once I do a try on of all of this. So for now, to make the boning channel, I thought that this is the nice secure selvage of my interlining. So I'm just going to turn that at the centre back and sew that down to be my channel for the boning. So that is my job for this trip, which should be kind of fun. So along with doing those boning channels, the other thing I've done is tried to stitch down the darts with a prick stitch, kind of like I did around the edge. It just gives this little bit of structure to the bust. You can see as I'm moving it around, it's kind of got more structure, more support where I've done the extra stitching than on the side where I haven't. So I'm hoping that that will replace the boning that could have been in those darts. And just, it looks a lot nicer, I think, the way it sits down. So we'll see how that goes. If you're wondering what it's like sewing on the train, this is basically me every day. I find a nice quiet spot, usually at the front of the train, and just sit and sew. And it's amazing how therapeutic it is, but also how many interesting conversations you end up having with people who are taking an interest in what you're doing. It's really lovely. So here we go. Channels are done. The lining is sewn to the front. All of the seams are trimmed. In order to turn, I have left the shoulder seams unsewn, and I'll sew them up later. So hopefully it'll work that way. I didn't want to do the turning at the side seams, which I think is the other way I could have done it, because I wanted to get those channels in early. At least that was my assumption. So we'll see. Anyway, all trimmed, ready to go. Here we turn. And as I enjoy the lovely magpie and butcherbird song on this crisp morning. So let me show you what I've been doing. Hang on. Right. I am really happy with how this is going so far. This is the bodice of my petticoat, of course. As you can see, I've turned it, I've ironed it. In a moment, I'm going to be sewing the shoulder-ish seams. But first, I need to, let me get my hair out of the way, run a channel to put a ribbon or something in here, because this centre front has to be gathered. What I'm thinking I'm going to do to make my life a little easier is stitch that channel now and run the ribbon through I'm probably just going to catch the ribbon on the back side here and just gather this centre front piece, because that's really all that's going to need gathering. And it will be easier to do it now when I can actually thread the ribbon through there into, I'll probably have to make 2 eyelet holes in the centre front for the ribbon to come out. I haven't decided whether I'll keep the ribbon in the back or actually make a feature of it in the front here. But if I top stitch just a narrow channel the whole way along, it will help this to sit nicely, and that'll provide something for the ribbon. But really, I think while I'll thread it through from there, I'll only really catch the ribbon there and start the gather from there, if you get my drift. So for my train travel today, I am going to be, I think, just using a running stitch rather than a back stitch for this job to make my narrow channel for the ribbon. But really, I'm loving how this looks. Cotton is so beautifully structured. Look at it. Can't wait to get the waistband and skirt on it. So here you see the channel that I've sewn for the ribbon. I used more of a prick stitch. You can possibly even see it better around the arm. A prick stitch, I'm assuming it's what it's called, just shows up as a small stitch that takes barely 1 or 2. It's almost like a back stitch, but you take hardly any of the fabric at the front. Here I've done it quite closely for where the ribbon is contained. As you can see, it comes out of a little hole just at the back there, gathered up quite nicely. So I ended up attaching the ribbon all the way up at the over the shoulder seam there. So while the ribbon runs through all of here, the gathering really only happens at the front of the bodice. But I think that looks really quite nice. I like how the prick stitch finishes it all off, and it's rather cute. So now, having done that, having the shoulder seams done, I am ready to work on the waistband for it. And look who's come to help me do the waistband. I've grabbed some of that white cotton tape to reinforce the waistband. So what I'm trying to do, when Laurie lets me, is tack that to the waistband. As you can see, she is trying really hard to groom my fingernails or help me thread my needle. So sewing with Laurie, never an easy job. But like I said, she's gorgeous. I wouldn't have it any other way. She's very helpful there. Right, so now that she's decided to go play somewhere else, I can actually get it stitched down. As you can see, my seam allowance is not going to be the full 1.5 centimetres on either side. I just didn't have wide enough piece left over to do that. But at least it is long enough, and that's the main thing. With that tacked in, it's time to start on the back stitch. I figure this waistband's going to actually be holding up a lot, so I want to make sure it's a nice, secure back stitch that I'm doing here, because I don't want my petticoat falling apart, really. So back on the train, and now with the waistband on the bodice, I've got to start on the skirt. I figured because not a lot of strain is being put on the skirt of this petticoat, I can get away with doing a running back stitch rather than a full back stitch. It just goes so much quicker, and because the skirts are quite long enough, it takes a while to hand sew something like this, especially when you're as slow as I am. Or your fabric, or your thread likes getting knotted up, like is happening here as well. If you've not done a running back stitch before, you basically take one back stitch and then do 4 or 5 regular stitches. I find it easier to just push the needle through the fabric and sort of manipulate with my left hand where I want the needle to go through, if that makes sense. And then I often find to stop the thread trying to knot it, I have to put my thumb over the thread as I pull it through. I don't know if that all makes sense. It's amazing the little tricks and things you discover as you get onto this hand sewing process. And then, because I'm felling the seam, I've got to clip it down before I turn it, sew it flat. Easy. Okay, so I've got a few minutes before my train gets in, so I thought I'd show you where I'm at. So the waistband is in and stitched down on the other side. What I need to do now is think about how I am closing the back. Now, I had planned to lace it, and I thought about putting eyelets in. So stabbing a hole, buttonholing around it and using that. And that would work. However, I hate buttonholing, and I wanted something a little bit stronger as well. So what I thought with my lacing, see these? These are my hooks and eyes. Now, I tend to, when I use a hook, make a thread bar rather than use the eyes of the hooks. So, as you can see here, I think I've got about 2 hooks left in this pack and about, 12 or so eyes there. And so I thought, could I use these little things to lace the back of the petticoat? Sort of, I don't know if you can see what I'm doing there. Dropped it, gonna have to find it. Can I attach those to the edges of the petticoat and put the lacing through that? So that is what I'm going to experiment with. I figure if I don't like it, I can keep the eye side there and put a hook in instead, or I can remove them completely and make the eyelets like would probably be more of the period. But I think the Regency people would have been really into reusing what you've got, what you're not using. I think they would have loved this idea, so I'm going to go with that for now and see how it goes. And how did it go? Well, you can see here, for this one at the waistband, I enclosed the eye in the seam because I had to piece it together anyway, and that seems to work. I actually quite like it. You can see I've used an old shoelace to lace this together. That seems to work too, and in the absence of anything better, hey, it works. That's the main thing. Right, I am nearly there, nearly done. All of the lacing's done, skirts on, waistbands on. I've even done the hem. Now, there's just one other thing I wanted to do to this petticoat to finish it off, and that is to give it a few tucks, because the tucks that you put around the base of the petticoat helps to give it just that bit more substance, a bit more fullness, and just helps then to give a bit more body to the skirt of the dress. However, because I was so tight on the amount of fabric I had, I really couldn't give it any extra length. And if I wanted to do 3 sort of 2.5 centimetre tucks, I was probably going to need an additional, 15, 20 centimetres of length in my skirt to take up that material in tucks. So since I couldn't do that, I was wondering whether a pin tuck could work the same. So let me show you what I've done. This is me experimenting with pin tucks around the base of the skirt, and my hope is that these will just give a bit more body to the base of it. Whether it'll be the same as a normal tuck, I just don't know if it'll be the same. I've not tried it before. I don't know what to compare it to, so who knows? But here's hoping it will do a little something. If nothing, it'll give just that little bit of something to the bottom of the skirt. But the other thing is, I have never hand sewn a pin tuck before. I don't know if I'm meant to just fold it over and do a running stitch, a back stitch, or what. I ended up, here we go, I don't know how well you can see it, but I ended up doing this similar to how I did the rolled hem. And if you saw my police and fit shoe, I did a rolled hem on the fit shoe where I took tiny stitch from that side, tiny stitch from that side, tiny stitch from that side, pulled it close together. And that meant I could draw a line on the back of the material and basically make my pin tuck around that. It gave quite a nice little pin tuck. It worked pretty easily. So look, I'm happy with how that has come out, whether it's how they would have done pin tucks back then. Well, I don't know. Maybe I should have done a little bit more research to see if that's a thing, but that's what I've done. I've got my 3 rows of pin tucks. I can always add a few more if I think it might need it, but for now I'm happy, and hopefully that means my petticoat is done. And indeed it is done, and I am glad to finally be able to try it on, wear it, show you how it looks. You know what? It's actually really, really comfortable. I would be quite happy to wear this out anywhere. I think it's gorgeous. I don't know what you think, but put a white shirt under it. I'm prepared to wear this anywhere I go. So anyway, thank you for joining me on another exciting Book Week adventure. Next up, I work on the actual dress. I'm so looking forward to this. So I hope to see you again real soon. Bye for now.